since in American history, every single big recession has always happened in summer. Every single one. Probably a lot of people figured what was going to happen is DeSantis, the governor of Florida, who's had a little bit of a rivalry, can you say, with Disney over the last couple years, got his way. I mean, he was able to round up his troops and sign a bill that basically he is not in full control, obviously, but I mean, he put Disney back on, or he took him off of, what is it?
It seemed like they had special controls over, I think, utilities and taxes and things like that. I might be wrong.
So they were self-governing, right?
Yeah, in a way. Yeah,
in the way of like they weren't taxed the same way. They ran their own. I mean, they had their own like fire department, police department, ambulances, what have you. All away from, and it's like the only thing in America that was run that way. Like they were self-governed in all the aspects that most places in across the country would be governed by the state. So we're not going to get into the nitty-gritty in terms of like, because the bill, a lot of things were passed that aren't just going to affect Disney. They're going to affect a lot of different things. I mean, we can say, so I'll just mention this, and then you could get into the rest. I know that when DeSantis did his little public speech right before he signed the bill, he mentioned multiple times of, and I don't know what you're allowed to say on YouTube. You and I one day should do a segment on what we can and can't say. I don't know, but the don't say gay bill, there was that was kind of what fueled the whole rivalry in the first place, and he mentioned that multiple times, almost like it just seemed kind of petty. Like, I don't like their views and ideology, quote unquote ideology on things, and it's time to get back on track, and it's time to keep them responsible, and
well, it seemed more like he was trying to push rules and agenda, and Disney decided to publicly take a stand on what their point of view was, which was opposed to that, and he made the choice to like, okay, well, if you aren't gonna agree with me, then I'm gonna, take away some of your powers, which
right.
in a way, it was a political thing. They all they did was come out and make a public stance, which, whether they had control over it or not, what the outcome was. Like, the biggest corporation in the state said, we don't agree with this policy, and he just went, well, I'll show you who I am, basically. It was kind of...
It seems so petty to the point that he called it the Burbank a Burbank corporation and the California company, where it's just the way if you look at, like, from a political standpoint, if you were to pick two states that couldn't be more different in terms of their political view, it would be California and Florida.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, maybe you could throw in like Texas in there. I don't know, but you look at Florida and California, and it just seemed like it just seemed like he was doing like, what would you call it? Like,
well, I mean, it's in a way, it's grandstanding because he's going. I mean, most likely he's going to try and run for president in next year.
Right.
Probably announced this year at some point, but I mean, he's got to at that point round up his base, which the base is, very conservative. He's got to take the base away from Donald Trump. So in order to do that, you make, very conservative stances, and, and Florida is a very big state when it comes to the electoral college. It's like
correct.
So, I mean, in a way, he's kind of, pounding his chest a little bit about being, look who I am. He'll probably get a lot more centered if he wins the nomination and has to go up against Biden. But, right now it's all about placating the base of the Republican Party, and when he's fighting against Donald Trump's base, that's how you do it.
Right. So he had I think 3 different people come up to the podium to kind of, he did his whole spiel, then he brought up, now okay, so before I get into this next part, I quickly want to say the second person he brought was like the head of the state board of education, whoever she was. And she's like, first and foremost, I'm a teacher, blah, blah, blah. And she talked about how she was a Disney World goer since she was a child for 41 years. And she canceled all her Disney, her annual pass. It's funny, she mentioned during when COVID happened, she's like, during COVID happened, I just didn't like how they closed it down, so I canceled my pass. But I'm like, wait, you canceled your pass while you couldn't go? But all right, moving on from that, I mean, she brought in her religion, and she brought in a bunch of stuff where what happened to separation of church and state. That's all I'm going to say, because that was half of the people we're talking about. And it just seemed very like they just did a jab after jab after jab at California, which had nothing to do with Disney World. And
it's easy target. I mean,
it's an easy target.
Taking jabs against California is an easy target,
right? And then you look at it seemed a lot of the. So my point was, a lot of the stuff, half of their arguments of like why they're unhappy with Disney has nothing to do with what the actual bill is going to do, which basically is going to again implement Disney World back into the system of paying taxes, which now let's get into the effects, the cause and the effects of things, right? So I have a handful of things that I think
they weren't getting the things that they managed themselves. They weren't getting the same tax rates or amount of taxes because they didn't have to pay certain government taxes to help support, police and fire and utilities and certain things because they manage that themselves. So they had their own kind of tax bubble from that, which is my understanding, and because of essentially their stance on that Don't Gay Say bill, which in my opinion, I mean, whether it was that or whether it was something, for some other, whether it was gay rights or women's rights or any other rights that was opposed to what his view was, he was gonna, take this stand anyway.
Completely.
It's just, they're not agreeing with me, so I can fight against Disney because conservatives, in a way, just like California, stand up against Disney, which they position as a liberal corporation. They're standing up against that, and it's like them making a stand against MSNBC or something. It's the same thing for them. So
100%.
Whatever the stance was against the original bill, they found a target to go, okay, well, we can just fight against this stupid thing and fight,
let that be our point of argument so we can take over what. So he appointed 5 people, 5 of people that he got to pick from. He personally got to pick and choose the 5 people that are going to be like the head of the board to basically regulate Disney moving forward in Florida. And so it seems like there's a lot of friction. I'm surprised I haven't found anything where Bob Iger hasn't really taken a public approach to say, hey, here's what happened this week, and moving forward, this is what we are expecting to, how it's going to go. I don't know. No, I personally haven't seen, and I kind of was diving into it a little bit, and I haven't found any statements from Disney, but I'm sure that'll come.
No, I haven't really heard any since the kind of the original.
It's been all week.
Statements were made, but for Bob Iger, I'm sure he's more concerned with things. I mean, this does affect the bottom line, but it's a small part of the bottom line against one of the biggest revenue drivers, and by not jumping in a way, it kind of at least.
I'm just so political.
Because it's happening anyway. So
let me bring this up here. If that isn't political, I don't know what is.
Oh, it's totally political.
Like, dude,
and like they're outside the park.
Keep Florida free, right outside Disney World.
What is this shirt? Is this shirt say MAGA? I can't tell what.
Probably. I'm not. I don't know.
I mean, it looks like it's only wide enough for 3 letters, but I don't know.
So, I mean, there is article after article of stuff going on with that, but all right, let's talk about basically the effects of what's going to happen here, of what you think. What do you I mean, Let me also go into another aspect of it. Is they're also going to control or regulate the safety protocols, fire and safety, because that was a huge issue with Disney World, and it has been with a lot of the Disney parks.
If there's some huge emergency, they've got to rely on, Florida's or Orlando's, systems to take care of it, where they, well, I guess the way Disney probably still maybe has their own forces to do it, but they probably weren't getting taxed in a way because they were covering it themselves, where now I think they're getting taxed where it's like, well, they don't get out of paying taxes for police and fire services. They can still pay for their own, but they don't get to get out of, So I don't know how that works, whether they still get their own, security and fire and certain things, so they don't get breaks on it, or if they have to rely more on, like, if there's some emergency, they gotta wait for Orlando police to show up.
I mean, there's a fire department on property, obviously, and it's been Disney's firemen. And I don't know if that's going to be now in control of, like, Disney's going to, offer up or give up that part of their land or rent it out to the state, so the state now can have a facility on property, because it's such a big property. So the entire property of Disney World is about the same size as San Francisco.
Oh yeah, I think it's a little bit bigger.
So it might be a little bit bigger. So
the irony of that sign we're saying here is, like, keep Florida free, whereas, like, there's a whole region that was, like, basically taking care of themselves outside the government, but now the government's
completely, it's completely hypocritical.
Yeah,
isn't that funny? Is they're all how dare anti-cancel culture, which I agreed with to a certain point, and keep freedom, don't tread on me, all this stuff, and then they're just choking Disney at its throat of, like, nope, now we're really taking control of things. So,
and all over making a vocal stance on something, like not even do anything about it, just saying, hey, I don't agree with this bill that's being passed, and saying, well, oh, you're not going to agree with it? Well, we're going to just basically take all of these powers that you have.
And if I'm just going to say this one sentence right here for all you, if you actually want to look deep into it, read about what's going on with some of the colleges on what they're doing with this new bill and how it's going to affect things. So some stuff's going on in Florida right now.
Yeah, well, that's a whole other thing.
That's a whole other thing we won't talk about.
It's a whole other thing. I mean,
yeah,
it could have been anything, but it's that what's labeled "Don't Say Gay" bill, which has its own effects, but it could have been.
There's a lot of stuff in that bill, though.
Disney could have made a public statement against
that bill. There's a lot of things that happened in that bill. It wasn't just that. Yeah. So now that Disney's going to be taxed. Now, like I said, they're gonna put Disney back into, or for the first time back, or into the system of paying taxes, just like Universal Studios, just like SeaWorld, just like Cedar Fair, whatever parks are out there. I don't, the way that Disney's been the last few years, and the way they've treated their guests and their loyal followers for decades, I don't want to say that, like, I don't feel bad for Disney, but they kind of had it coming of the way they've just kind of been running things, very lackadaisical of any type of effort. I mean, I could go into detail about a lot of things.
I guess you could say they haven't done themselves favors by kind of milking their following for as much as they can, especially their park goers, for a long time.
Right.
Which directly impacts the park.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, we're going to cost you a little more money. And they'd be like, okay, well, you've been nickel and diming us for the past 5 years.
So you and I almost, in about a month or two, it's almost been a year since we went to Disney World. We went last year. And it was...
Yeah.
And I went a few years before that, but prices skyrocketed even before we got there. And then after we left, just within a few months after us leaving, everything even got more expensive. And then over the course of the last 4 months, everything's I know the properties and landlords and everything in Florida, I know the laws have been passed and this and that landlords can increase the pricing on living or rent or whatever have you. So Florida in general is just more expensive, and then you get to Disney World, and they've just increased everything in terms of like the cost, and just it's insane. I don't think this is going to help the situation. I think that I don't know the ins and outs of Disney's tax situation before this, but I mean, now they're paying real taxes, and I'm just assuming that they're going to try to counter that with...
I'm sure they'll pass it along. They'll try not to, eat most of that cost themselves. They'll pass it along. The thing is, if it was them not nickel and diming their customers, over the past few years, and then this happened, said, well, sorry, we got to pay all this extra money, so prices are going up. And we're like, no, we've been pushing as much as we can on revenue, and now we have additional costs, and we're going to add that price on you. It's just going to, you can make excuses if they're like, okay, well, we have this additional cost because of the stance that we made, and so price is going to go up. And then when they've already been pushing the limit, basically playing, the supply and demand game of like, well, we can keep increasing prices and we're still selling out, so we'll just keep doing it.
We're just going to keep doing it.
And then now it's like, well, now we've got this additional cost because of taxes, so we're going to push it up further. It's going to definitely hurt, because they're not going to, because they really answer to shareholders, and shareholders want, increased revenue, and additional taxes, it hurts increased revenue, so it's, put that on the consumer, which is what businesses usually do, especially public companies, because they're like, well, let's put it on consumers and not eat the cost. And I'm very sure that's what they'll do. And I guess we'll see what the impact is over the next year, whether that negatively impacts the parks, especially going into a recession, which is pretty clear what's going to happen over the next year. How bad it is unclear, but it's happening. Inflation's bad, and it's not really getting that much better. So recessions happen. It's not like the end of the world, but it's going to happen, and people are going to tighten their wallets, and Disney making it worse by increasing prices isn't going to help their bottom line either.
So yesterday, towards the end of work, I was talking to actually the president of my company, and I was telling him, he goes, do you have anything planned over whatever this weekend, next weekend? I said, I'm going to go to Disneyland next week. My cousin's coming in town, and then I'm going the following day with some coworkers, and I was telling him who. And so we were talking Disney a little bit, and he's a shareholder. He has been for a long time. Mm-hmm. And he said, since this announcement from DeSantis, because it was, the stock was going down for over the last 6 months, about 6 months. It was going down on a pretty steady decrease. And then he said on Monday after that announcement, it skyrocketed. And I was like, really? He's like, yeah. So he's like, I'm not going to go into details of all that stuff, but a lot of shareholders are really happy about that announcement, because they, for whatever reason, they think it's going to be a good thing. They think it's going to... But here's what I meant earlier, is Disney hasn't done itself any favors by really taking advantage of the loyal customers that they've been for decades. It's kind of a kick in the pants of like, hey, wake up, dude. Now, I'm not saying I agreed with, the law that passed, or the bill that passed, or that was signed, but I might be a little bit of a wake up. Like, hey man, you're not invincible. You can't do everything at any time. So maybe get back on track and start doing what you did to be the company everyone knows and loves, and, make money the right way, not just take advantage of people. Also, another thing is the president of my company that I was talking to, he said that the recessions historically happen. He said there's been something like 40-something recessions since the beginning of American history. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that was it. It was between 30 and 40 or something like that.
Well, it just, recession technically just means that I think the GDP is declining over 3/4.
Drops a certain amount, right?
It doesn't mean
everything goes totally. Yeah.
Yeah, it just means the economy is...
It's not like the 1920s or anything, like the crazy recessions. Right, I hear you. So, what he said is, since in American history, every single big recession has always happened in summer. Every single one. And I was like, really? He's like, yeah, every single time. The number that when it actually drops to the certain amount that you can say now we're in a deep recession, it's been summer every single time. And he broke it down and explained why. I was like, okay, that's interesting. So this summer, we're going to see when the recession really starts to hit really hard on a national level all over the place and everyone's feeling it. It's going to be maybe June, maybe July, who knows? And then with, Disney's finally paying taxes. I wonder how they're going to go about it. Are they going to decrease because people can't afford it, and maybe the demand isn't as high as it used to be because people can't afford it in a few months? We'll just see. You said a year. My point was, it's going to be interesting, obviously, over the course of the year, but even over the next few months, it's going to be interesting to see some of the decisions they make on how things are, when in terms of pricing and having the capability of even traveling out to Disney World.
Well, the thing about Disney is they're the parks is just one part of their business. They're super diversified. That there's certain, whether they need to help the bottom line and kind of, which it sounds like it's true, one of the biggest revenue drivers is the parks.
Right.
And they need to find a way to support the parks by increasing volume of guests in the park and cutting costs elsewhere that could be impacted by some of the things they're doing in entertainment. So, cuts that could be happening with, movies they're making, what they're doing with Disney Plus, their TV, everything that they're doing. If they make certain cuts in those realms to justify maybe cutting costs for the parks. They can cut certain things in the parks, but that they can cut things in the park and outside the park to help them make the decision. Okay, we're going to cut, prices within the park or ticket prices or whatever, so we can drive more people. So having more people, increases overall revenue, which helps the parks, which is the biggest revenue driver. So Disney at least has the advantage where they're not just they aren't just the park. That they can, find ways to kind of move money around to support the parks if they need to. So, so that's the thing is we'll see what happens where, wherever the economy goes, they'll pivot, they'll find ways. But ultimately, their goal, whether they care about the guests or not, who they really care about are the investors.
Of course.
That's really what they care. So whatever choice they make, whether it makes more money for the park, helps park goers, helps, their movies do better or not, what they really care about is having people invest in the company and what they see the future of the company being.
Correct.
So it may be detrimental to the short term of guests and how many people they have, is all they really care about, which is true for really any public company, is they care about the investors, not the actual business itself, because that's how they get their money. So,
well, when
they make choices that are maybe not in the interest of Disney fans and Disney park goers, but more toward the investors.
Which they've kind of been on that path when Chapek came in of how do we make our investors happy instead of, the
Bob Iger did, if you just have a good business that just does well and people love and makes money, that makes investors happy. But when you start penny pinching and finding ways to, stretch things out and kind of test the limits of your, fan base to just kind of get more money, then you're going to get less money and people are going to see that.
And then you heard about 7,000 people were let go. He's like, oh yeah. He's like, oh, and he's the president of a big company, right? So he's like, oh yeah, that's just trimming the fat. So nonchalantly. Almost heartless. But for how many employees Disney has, it's probably a little bit of a smaller number.
Yeah, well, that's the
but
thing.
Still,
in that same vein of how big they are and how diversified they are.
Right.
That's not 7,000 people from their park, which is also all the parks they have.
I don't know. It's parks. It's all over. I don't think it was.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's not just the parks. If you're just saying it's just Disneyland, that's a lot of people. Disneyland, Disney World, it's a lot of people. But it's like
So talking about keeping
all
the
the stuff they have their fingers
right,
in like, you know, entertainment and parks and wherever else they're invested in, and 7,000 people, which is, you know, not good. You know, you don't want nobody, you know, to lose their jobs, but it's not like it's out of one bucket. It's
right.
they have a very wide pool of able to pull people, and if you know each thing's like, okay, I need to cut 100 here, 100 there. They're just so big they can cut it. And
He said that's when stocks started to slowly go up after that announcement. That was like 2 or 3 weeks ago.
yeah, I mean, I looked it up. I mean,
So
I looked up the stock. If you look over the past 6 months, it really started to pick up at the end, or maybe in January. It peaked.
that's interesting. A couple months.
It peaked early February, and it's gone down since then. It went up a little bit over the past few days, but not a lot. I mean, if you look at like the last year, it's still not where they were in March.
Now we're getting into
2 years ago.
we're getting into the
190. They're basically down $90 a share 2 years ago, and they're not even close to coming back to that.
I mean, it was an uphill battle for Bob Iger. I'll give you that, but
Well, he still got a lot to deal with. He hasn't fixed whatever.
oh, that's what I'm saying. You said a couple months ago is when it started going up, and that's he's doing what he can to get things back on course. I know they're in like $700 million worth of debt.
Yeah, I don't really think Disney Plus has done what they wanted to. They thought, oh, we got this, you know.
I think it's more, but
that COVID helped. I think putting all those things on Disney Plus that basically made money. I was watching some video recently. It was like, oh, the biggest flops of all time. And there was a couple from the past few years that were Disney movies that they just released on Disney Plus because they didn't have a release, like Turning Red and like another one, which obviously cost like several $100 million to develop because they're animated, and just went on Disney Plus, and they can't really tie revenue into that, or just on the books just look like a bust.
yeah.
So I mean, it doesn't help.
Well, I mean, we
made this movie cost $200 million to make, and we can't tie back any revenue to it. Doesn't help the bottom line.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's the overall Disney company. I mean, this is very specific for how Disney World and the Disney parks in that area are going to be moving forward. But we will have to see. Well, I don't know. We'll do an update every couple months on. We should do like every few months with the pricing.
Maybe like a quarterly. I mean,
we do quarterly.
Q1 is about that. Well, we're in the end of Q1. If you look at like the end of Q2, which would be in June, end of June, you can see how things go after that.
Yeah.